listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.
Thank you for listening to Community Forum. My name is Johnny Chandler. I'm the owner of KCCC 930 AM, the host of Community Forum. With me today, for the first time in person, normally our interviews are done over Zoom or Google Meet or one of those big tech company video blogs. This is Paul Gessing. Paul Gessing in person in our makeshift studio, which will one day look much nicer. How you doing, Paul?
Doing great, Johnny. Good to be with you, and just trying to stay cool. And I'm on a little bit of an extended visit to Southeast New Mexico, speaking at the Rotary Club later on today as we record this, and been in Artesia, Roswell, doing talks. And Thursday I'm heading to Clovis, New Mexico as well before I head home to Albuquerque.
Go Wildcats. I am a Clovis High School graduate.
All right.
From 1998, and then spent 4.5 years at ENMU in Portales. So I'm very familiar with southeastern New Mexico. So what's the point of your trip down here?
Just getting the word out. You know, the Rio Grande Foundation, we're not like those left-wing organizations that can hang out pretty much in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Las Cruces. We have to reach out to our friends and supporters across New Mexico, and no area of the state's more important to New Mexico, no area of the state's more, kind of philosophically aligned with the Rio Grande Foundation and its limited government views than Southeast New Mexico. So I'm happy to be here, enjoying the nice, cool triple-digit temperatures, and seeing a lot of great folks here in all these different cities and towns.
I'll tell you, summer has taken a minute for it to set in here. We haven't really had 100-degree days until very recently.
That's what my board member up in Roswell said. He said that it's been a little bit on the cool side, which there's a lot more greenery between, say, Roswell and Carlsbad than there was between Albuquerque and, well, specifically Klein's Corners, that exit there off of I-40 that you shoot down if you are going to Albuquerque. It was bone dry between the interstate and Roswell, and it's been pretty darn dry. And you follow the news in Albuquerque, the river's dry again. We're all hoping for a big monsoon season here in New Mexico, and hopefully that'll do a lot for the water supplies, et cetera.
Yeah, we've had some good rain down here.
Good.
Well, like every 2 or 3 days we've had a good rain.
We could use that in the rest of the state.
Yeah, we don't typically get it, so we'll take it.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to the point here, or the topics of conversation. This is not too far after the latest primary election. That's probably a great place to start. What do you got, some opinions on that?
Yeah, well, I think everybody was shocked at how big of a blowout the Democratic primary was. Deb Haaland, we know she's got a lot of money. We know that she is tied in very closely with the progressive base of her party, and nearly 75% turnout there, or not turnout, but she won 75% nearly of the Democratic primary voters, beating Sam Bregman. That was, I think, very surprising. I remain surprised that Bregman did not use more effectively the new law on the books, the semi-open primaries law that gave people like myself and others the ability to register as independent and then vote in whichever party we decided to. So we're not pledging allegiance, if you will, to the R's or the D's. You go independent in a primary, and this will be on the books for future primaries. But in this primary, you were able to choose on the day of which party you voted for. And, I think the Republicans have good candidates for governor. Each of them has pluses and some minuses, and it's going to be a challenge for Greg Hull to beat Deb Haaland in this general election in November. But that's something that I wasn't concerned about in the primary. I thought each of the candidates had their major selling points on the Republican side. So I too took a Democrat ballot, and apparently was totally swamped by whether it's the progressive base of the Democratic Party or whoever voted in that election. They really turned out for Deb Haaland. And I think anybody in Southeast New Mexico, given her track record on energy, anybody who is moderate to conservative is going to be really concerned about what she is looking to do if she gets elected.
So you're registered independent, as you just implied, and or you just told us. So this was the first time that you got a vote in a primary election in New Mexico?
No, I was previously registered as Republican because that was the group that I had more interest in voting in their primaries. I'm pretty strategic. I mean, I'll vote in any way that I think I can leverage my vote the most for the issues I care about, which is limited government and individual liberty. Other states, I used to live in Virginia. Virginia had a completely open primary system, so you could just go into the polling place and vote for whoever in the primary that you wanted to on the election day. New Mexico's always had closed primaries, and that limited people to those who were willing to pick a side. Now, I think personally, under such an environment, it's silly to declare yourself independent because it doesn't mean that in November you have to vote for anyone specific.
Right.
Just vote in the primary, to maximize your potential for having an impact. And I realize that in most elections, most single votes don't really matter. But again, I thought Sam Bregman and his campaign should have really made an appeal to not only get people to re-register perhaps as independents, but to reach out to those independent voters. Because we all knew going into the primary, Deb Haaland had the progressive base of the Democratic Party locked up, and it was just a matter of can Bregman eat into that number or add new people to that number that he was going to get enough to make a dent and possibly defeat her. Obviously, that did not work out to his favor. She crushed him. And we saw on the Republican side that Greg Hull kind of rode the, oftentimes the pre-primary convention, and I follow the Republican side a little closer, but the pre-primary convention's kind of irrelevant, but that was not the case in this GOP primary. Greg Hull was the choice of the party base kind of from day one. I do wonder if Doug Turner had more time because he kind of jumped in fairly late. And Doug Turner also, he was in the primary 16 years ago when Susana Martinez ultimately came out of that Republican primary. There was a total of 5 Republicans, including Susana Martinez, Alan Way, who was kind of the other leading Republican at the time, and then Doug Turner was in that mix. So he'd run for governor before, ran his PR firm that was D.W. Turner, now is Agenda. He definitely had some connections to Southeast New Mexico that he was trying to leverage and ride the Southeast New Mexico wave and his strength in this area of the state. But Greg Hull had his strength in Rio Rancho and Albuquerque and really kind of won that election fairly handily. And by the way, again, I don't deal with partisan politics, especially internal party politics, but I do think that divide among Republicans is one of the reasons that they struggle so much in statewide races because, in Southeast New Mexico, you tend to be conservative voters appealing to conservatives. And so who's the most conservative, who's the most principled, et cetera. In Albuquerque, you have to kind of have a much more narrow path. And Albuquerque, Las Cruces, Santa Fe, I don't know if anybody can win, but you have to really moderate that message. And it's tough to appeal to, while the voting base is more Democrat, Albuquerque's the biggest city and metro area, versus here in Southeast New Mexico, where the conservatives are concentrated. And getting candidates that can appeal to both of those groups and then in a general election has obviously proven very, very difficult for Republicans to do because they haven't won a statewide race since, I believe, Judy Nakamura won a Supreme Court race during the Martinez administration. So it's kind of one of those systemic challenges New Mexicans face. And, they're in a big fight right now over who's going to be the latest chair, et cetera. I'm not going to get into that. We don't take positions on that. We're a nonpartisan organization, but I do follow these things. And when I see patterns develop like that, I recognize and analyze them.
Right. So is there anything else besides any other primary, besides the gubernatorial candidates that surprised you or stood out in any of the other races statewide?
There was a local tax assessor's race where I thought in Albuquerque that an assessor on the Democratic side who had been incumbent had overreached his position, and he was defeated. But in general, everything was fairly vanilla because there weren't a lot of controversial races for Congress, U.S. Senate, et cetera. Some of the big marquee races weren't really, controversial this time around. There's only one incumbent in the legislature who lost a primary. And unfortunately, that was a moderate Democrat named Marion Matthews who lost to a progressive Democrat. Now, as is always the case, and we see this, and we've talked about this process and trend, what has been happening long term, and we're talking 10 to 15 years on the Democrat side, is that you have those stalwart, old school, traditional, moderate Democrats who are being replaced by more progressive candidates on the Democratic side. And Matthews had voted against paid family leave. She'd voted against some of these big government schemes. So the progressives came after her, and yet again, they were able to replace her with a progressive candidate. Now, it is a toss-up, maybe legislative seat. So the Republicans are going to have a chance to win that seat in November. But if the Democrats maintain that seat, you have another in that long trend line of moderate Democrats losing out to the progressives. And that's kind of why we've arrived where we are. Michelle Lujan Grisham is certainly the most progressive Democrat I've seen in my time in New Mexico, dating back to 2006. But I look at all the way back to the Johnson administration and Bruce King. Once you get beyond that, I get a little fuzzy because that's beyond my lifetime.
Right.
And progressive wasn't, really that much of a thing in the same way that it is now. But, Michelle Lujan Grisham is progressive, as I would call her and say she is. Deb Haaland will be, if you will, one standard deviation further to the left if she gets elected. So that's why this race is so important for governor.
Let's talk. So looks like the Iran war might be coming to an end, hypothetically. Maybe. We'll see.
Maybe.
Right?
This deal seems to have more legs than any other deal has had to date. So we shall see. And certainly oil prices have started to drop from off of their very elevated levels.
Right. I was in California last week. I was the best man at my buddy's wedding, so congratulations to him. But I rented a car, drove all over Temecula in Southern California, and I had to fill that thing up twice. Yeah. Right? And so 10 gallons was $60.
Wow.
For 10 gallons of gasoline. Yeah. They were hovering around $6 a gallon in California. California, you always expect higher gas prices than normal.
Yeah.
But down here, we were seeing $4 a gallon even, or closer, just over $4 a gallon. And so while that does hurt the average person's pocketbook, that doesn't necessarily hurt the state of New Mexico's pocketbook. So what are we looking at surplus-wise on top of the continued surpluses that we've had?
Yeah, so again, as I always point out at the beginning of all these conversations, New Mexico, just under a decade ago, entered a production-driven oil and gas boom, the likes of which we've rarely, if ever, seen in the United States, let alone New Mexico. We've always been an oil-producing state, natural gas as well, but production has taken off, and that's why we're the second leading producer of oil among U.S. states to only Texas. And its epicenter is right here in southeast New Mexico, Lee and Eddy counties, which last time I saw data showed that they were the most oil-producing counties in the entire country. So these are the biggest producing counties, and I forget which one, Lee or Eddy, is number one and number two, but you get the picture.
Well, that's a rivalry that we could talk about.
Yeah. We'll just move right on over that one. But let's just say that money is flowing into New Mexico at a very high level. And so we have billions of dollars in kind of existing revenue that's now folded into the budgets that have grown tremendously, 75% budget growth on the general fund side with this governor. So basically 8 years. And then we've had the permanent funds that have seen just incredible amounts of money. We're over $70 billion in the permanent funds, again, attributable to oil and gas. But there's an extra $850 million. The Iraq war is obviously, damaging. It's been a lot of spending. But if you want to put a silver lining there, it's that New Mexico has an extra $850 million that it was not foreseen to have due to the elevated prices in the Iran war. It does have. And I am doing some informal conversations with the whole campaign. And I have pleaded in numerous interviews and will be making this point publicly between now and January that Michelle Lujan Grisham should call a special session for one reason and one reason only, and that is to provide rebates to average New Mexicans with that $850 million that is literally, pennies from heaven, or in this case, $850 million from heaven. So New Mexicans have been hit, as you just alluded to and stated, by higher gas and oil prices. But of course, that money also doubles up upon itself because shipping is more expensive. Other items in our society are made more expensive. We've seen inflation uptick significantly. I think that while my preference long-term is for tax reform the GRT, eliminate the personal income tax longer term, initially, especially while, as much as I hate to say it, Michelle Lujan Grisham being the relative moderate in the race, or in the governor's mansion relative to Deb Haaland, it would be a nice thing for her to do and would burnish her legacy quite a bit if she decided to do something with that $850 million. According to Ishmael Torres of the Legislative Finance Committee, and I actually think this is too much, but this is what he said. He said $750 per household a month since the Iran war kicked off. That's the additional cost that we've been bearing. I don't know if that's accurate. I know it's impacted families, but it would be great between now and January to see some of that money return to average New Mexicans, because maybe Greg Hall wins and takes office in January. Hopefully, the Iran war is a distant memory by then, as are the elevated oil prices that we see right now. Now, obviously, this region does not want oil prices to completely collapse and drop down further than, say 50 or 60
bucks. Yeah, there's
bucks.
a real sweet spot for us down here.
Yeah, and that's important. So far, I think the trend line is towards that $50 or so level that was in place before the Iran war. That's going to take several months, though. The Strait of Hormuz, all these things are going to take some time to work themselves out. But as long as the economy holds up, I think we should be okay. Now, there are some signs and possible recession and whatnot. We'll get to that bridge when we get there. I don't think it's necessarily going to happen. I think if we can get this Iran situation resolved, then the economy will perk back up again.
This is going to be relevant. Do you read the Albuquerque Journal every day, I assume?
I do, yes.
Right, as do I. So did you see the article, I think it might have been just yesterday, on the Abrazo homes?
It's funny because, yes, I'm aware of Abrazo Homes. In fact, I'll make a plug for our podcast, Tipping Point, New Mexico. You'll have you have or should have an interview that you can run from that Tipping Point program. I sat down with Mackenzie Bishop, who's the principal of that home building operation, Abrazo, for a podcast, and he did allude to it, saying that he was considering looking for more business out of state, and I think that is a wise approach. I assume that's what you're referring to.
Yeah. That article stated that they love New Mexico from the beginning. They'll never leave New Mexico. There were some good stats in there about the number of housing starts in Texas versus the number of housing permitting starts in the state of New Mexico. You had him on your podcast recently, which we'll find and make sure to air. So I think the question is, why don't you tell us a little bit about what he was getting at? Because I think what he was talking about in that article is exactly kind of what the Rio Grande Foundation tries to focus on when it comes to the affordability in the state of New Mexico.
Yeah, well, buckle up with the podcast situation, because Mackenzie was on talking about doing business in other states. I also sat down with a gentleman who owned a cigar shop in Albuquerque, who is also leaving New Mexico and heading to Fort Worth, Dallas, Fort Worth area to move for his own family and to set up a cigar business there. And then the head of the New Mexico Restaurant Association, a woman named Carol White, who's fought for lower taxes and less regulations on restaurants, she's retiring and soon to be in Arizona. So this is a trend, It's a trend that we've seen for a long time in New Mexico, but I wasn't trying to plan 3 guests back to back to back who are really looking at options out of state. But my view, especially now with Deb Haaland looming on the horizon, is you need an escape plan from New Mexico because first and foremost, even during the midst of this oil and gas boom, with plenty of money flowing in, we've seen taxes go up. We've seen the quality of government and government services, the education system, the economy broadly kind of stagnate. We're not doing much beyond oil and gas in New Mexico. There's attempts, and even the governor's on board with things like data centers, but they're just not willing to address the root causes of our problems in New Mexico, which is the policies, the gross receipts tax, the income tax, the regulations.
But we also tax Social Security in the state still, correct?
We still tax Social Security.
So you have Carol Wright with the Restaurant Association who's retiring. She's been in that position a very long time. My wife's PR firm has done some work with them in the past, right? So we know her fairly well. And then, so she's retiring on the cusp of taking Social Security, right? And she's like, wait a minute, I'm going to get taxed on something that I paid in for my entire career. So the point is that you didn't plan on having back-to-back guests talking about that, but that is the sentiment in the state. That's what just naturally happened.
Yeah, exactly. And McKinsey specifically being in housing, first and foremost, you talk about Albuquerque, and it's by far and away the biggest city. So you're kind of going to focus to an extent on that area, but there's a lack of easily developable land in the city of Albuquerque and in environs because there's geographical barriers, et cetera. And then within Albuquerque, you have still Mayor Keller in place, the crime, the regulatory burdens, which in his case, of course, are permits and the ability to get land and bring housing and make it possible on that land. Then you have taxes. The gross receipts tax is a huge burden on the housing industry. And we talk about the housing crisis, the lack of affordable housing. And what does that mean in New Mexico? It generally means we got a new government program. We're going to build a bunch of affordable houses rather than, hey, this gross receipts tax where you have to pay GRT on lumber and other inputs into a house is really killing our industry, not to mention the labor costs. A lot of those guys, they call them contractors for a reason. They're not full-time employees, so you're paying GRT on those people as well when they do work for you. So it's a really tough situation, and our growth is not where it needs to be as a state. Yes, there are still opportunities, but you look at the possibility that New Mexico doubles or triples down with Deb Haaland in November, and I think McKinsey is making a good business decision looking for opportunities. And what I've learned in the Texas market specifically, my wife sells office commercial furniture, is that the big boys, the big companies in Texas are based in San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, Austin. Those people forget completely. You might as well say Lubbock and El Paso and Amarillo are foreign countries to those folks because they have plenty of business and they're booming in their area of the state. So you kind of have this opportunity for enterprising operations out of New Mexico to come in and set up shop and do work in those areas. And it doesn't mean all of them. It could mean just one or two of them. But those are, to New Mexico eyes, booming areas where people are moving to, businesses, jobs, opportunities. And then the regulatory and tax implications are much lower. So it's kind of a win-win. You're jumping on board with a faster growing, forgotten about area of the state of Texas and really making an opportunity for yourself. So I'm not surprised that McKinsey and his Abrazo Homes are looking to go there.
I think it's interesting that he decided to do an interview with the Albuquerque Journal in reference to it as well, because I feel like that really raises the profile for a lot of individuals. Plus, I mean, Abrazo Homes, it just seems like really everybody knows who they are, right?
Exactly. And McKinsey, if you listen to the interview, and by that I mean not just you, but your listeners, McKinsey's a very likable guy. He is totally bought into growing up and being a New Mexican. UNM, he's very tied in with the athletics program there and supports them, personally and financially. So he has the, in New Mexico, a lot of this, especially in Albuquerque, it's all about street cred. And are you truly a New Mexican? I've been here now over 20 years and have family ties here dating back to, post World War II time frame. And still I get, well, you're not really New Mexican and this, that, and the other. And it's a ridiculous statement and accusation, but I think McKenzie feels empowered, and he also is very much along the wavelength of the Rio Grande Foundation. He was on our board of directors for a very brief period of time before some personal issues and responsibilities with specific home building groups, advocacy organizations took up more of his time. So yeah, he's somebody who is maybe more willing than most in that business to stick their necks out. But I applaud him for doing it, and it's important to have that portrayed and discussed publicly.
Well, now that I think about it more since we've been talking about it, I almost think like in the article he was almost like apologizing to New Mexicans in a way, right? I mean, he wasn't personally, but he's like, hey, like I love New Mexico, but in order for my business to grow and succeed and become even more successful, I'm probably going to have to do stuff out of the state, right? It was kind of like he's almost like, I'm sorry, but what else am I going to do considering the regulatory and the business environment that the state of New Mexico puts us through on a regular basis?
Absolutely. And there was another article also in the Albuquerque Journal about a diner in Albuquerque on Central called Loyola's.
Yeah, I read that one too.
And talk about restaurants, and
she specifically referenced, I think, taxes as well.
Oh yeah. She and again, restaurants and so many businesses, and it's one of the roles the Rio Grande Foundation can play, because I get my money from supporters who donate, who believe what we believe and want us to advocate broadly on their behalf. But their names are not published anywhere, so they can be very private about their giving and their indirect advocacy. But once you go and talk to the media, you're really putting yourself out there, and you can get people who don't like what you have to say. In fact, so I'll describe the Loyola's Diner situation. They spoke out about the taxes and the regulations and the homeless and all of the issues because they're closing their doors. And it's kind of this iconic diner that was part of Breaking Bad and et cetera. And so she came out very publicly and kind of, if you will, hot and heavy. She'd probably been storing this up for years, if not decades, because she's seen the same thing that we've all seen, especially in Albuquerque, where the city has deteriorated, become more unsafe, and the homeless situations run rampant. And so now that she's kind of calling it quits, she's done, she's closing, she can get it off her chest and kind of say what she really thinks about the situation. And so, whatever her decision is her decision, and that's the reality. But the reality is that she speaks for large numbers of businesses in the restaurant industry and elsewhere that are just so frustrated with the way things are done in this state and the backward nature of the anti-business philosophy. And, she just can't say it because she has to bring her product to customers of all ideological stripes. And somebody on social media, when I posted the story, reposted it, they said, "Oh, I didn't know the owner was MAGA." I'm like,
"Yeah, that's
you don't supporting Trump has nothing to do with whether you're dealing with out of control homeless situation on the streets of Albuquerque or regulations."
Then that's part of the divide of the politics that's happening. That's kind of part of what it is. It's like you either support everything that one side's doing, or you're MAGA, or you support MAGA and you're not, or you're liberal if the opposite. It's just like it's one or the other. There's no more. I mean, the fact that you're an independent is like a rarity. Is
absolutely
my point.
And Deb Haaland is trying to ride that trend to the governor's mansion. Most of her rhetoric and things that she's said publicly are just Trump's bad. I stand up to Trump, this, that, and the other. And look, I think anybody who just completely agrees with everything that Trump has said and done, you need to check your own perspectives, because he's kind of been all over the place and changed his mind on numerous occasions. So, any politician who you allow to think for you, you need to do some reading and some research on your own. There's things I support about what he's said and done, and there's things that I have tremendous frustration with where he's been. But to run a race for governor and essentially put yourself up as being against the administration in Washington, and that's true whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or some other person who will eventually come along in a couple of years, You can't run a state that way. And hopefully, and this is something, again, I'm going to be trying to advocate with and work behind the scenes with Greg Hull. I'm not joining his campaign, but this is what we do at the Rio Grande Foundation. The role of a think tank is to kind of be that third party who can analyze the policies and say, here's some ideas for how you want to talk about this and move forward with this policy idea, or here's something you want to avoid. And I remain open. I would love nothing more than to talk to Deb Haaland and give her some ideas about how she could actually help New Mexicans rather than just saying Trump bad, Orange Man bad.
What are the chances of her coming on your podcast?
0.
Okay. She's not even 1%.
She won't do even forums and conversations with the Albuquerque Journal.
Right.
And she's notoriously well known as being not exactly, I'll just say it, she's not considered to be very smart. She is not somebody who speaks well in public, and you can go online and find congressional testimony that Deb Haaland has given or attempted to give during her time as Interior Secretary when, of course, Biden came in hot and heavy saying, we're going to shut down fracking on federal lands. We're going to do this, do that. And she was chosen to be the point person on that issue. Now, if you sat me in front of Congress and told me to advocate against fracking and the oil and gas industry, I would look like a deer in the headlights, but that's because I don't believe any of that stuff. She clearly believes a lot of it and did a terrible job, I think, if you look at that kind of testimony stuff that you'll see.
We've seen some of that
she
floating
did
around
not
on
do very
social
well
media for the campaign. All right, so we don't get you in studio very often, actually ever. So this is the first time. So I'd like to do a two-parter, right? We're out of time for the first episode.
Sure.
So go ahead for the end of this part 1, go ahead and plug the Rio Grande Foundation and all your sites. And then, for the listener's sake, it'll sound like 2 parts, but we're just going to start recording a second one right away.
Sure thing. Well, I know I came down here and visited with you at one point. I think I have done one in person with you.
Was that in my house at the time?
It might have been at your house.
I was still.
I think it might have even been pre-COVID. I'm not sure.
When I first bought the radio station, I was recording out of my home.
Yeah.
So we've upgraded a little bit.
So it's riograndefoundation.org, errorsofen.chantment.com, which is the most updated site that you can find these days. It's the blog site. It's where we put a lot of information out on a day-to-day basis. And then, of course, Tipping Point New Mexico, tippingpointnm.com is our podcast. We do 2 things on that. One, we talk about the issues on a weekly basis, what's going on in New Mexico, kind of how the national and local political scene fit together and policies. And then we have an interview where I talk to folks like Mackenzie Bishop. That one, as we sit here, is the most recent. But Matthew Monty, who ran a cigar shop in Albuquerque and is also leaving the state. And then Carol White will be out in another week or so after that. So we've got some fantastic guests. I had a conversation with a woman named Anastasia Bowden. She was a luncheon speaker at an event we had. She's with the Pacific Legal Foundation. We were talking about the future of the Supreme Court and some of the decisions that are kind of starting to trickle out of the court, as they always do every year in late June. So she's fascinating to talk to as well. She's got her own podcast that we discussed a little bit. So a lot of good stuff.
Million podcasts floating around. It's all about finding the right one. Tipping Point. nm.com is certainly worth it. So the next part 2, I want to talk about the recent denial by the city council to increase taxes in Albuquerque, but you brought up data centers for a second. And so I'd like to talk about Project Jupiter as well. So Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation. This is the end of part 1.
You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.